All right, guys, we've got a bunch of people waiting, and I'm so sorry, guys, for us being a little bit late, but we are here. So I am Lisa Kastner. I'm the founder and executive editor for Running Wild and Rise Presses, and I'm here with one of our amazing authors, H.J. Brennan. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of intro to this fantastic book that literally is coming out January 22nd. So this then is what counts renders an unlikely contemporary couple bound in love and forced into a tragic odyssey. James is 30-something and emotionally adrift when he encounters a tall, heroic, and deserted June. They work and sweat side by side on a historic construction project in the forest alongside the Chesapeake. Their mutual passion is lit rather. June's secrets are revealed and love and life are threatened. 25 years later, James is alone. He reflects on that short time he and June had shared. It seems like yesterday, and she was bigger than life and the only love he'd ever known. It was a physical year of working with their hands and enjoying their bodies, and they took hold of those days and swung them over their heads. When June's troubled past shows up, she lays out her options. I either fight hard, run hard, or I'm screwed. They ran. And as James tells the story in his darkly comic An Unsettled Retirement, a mystery builds as to why he's alone when his memories of that single year with June present such a widescreen love. H.J. Brennan delivers this epic story of complicated love, its risky decisions, and its lingering aftermath amid beautifully observed imagery, all impressions sharpened by violence and anger, or danger, rather. It's a hard book to put down and even harder to forget. So that's just one of the incredible blurbs we've already gotten from Angela Newman, author of Lay It on My Heart and Home Remedies. So with that, I want to say welcome. It is fabulous to see you.
Thanks.
And I am sure everybody who's joined, and we've got a really amazing showing of people on the variety of social media that we are currently live streaming off of, who are, I'm sure they're dying to hear what inspired you to write this story.
Oh, Lisa, I was fortunate and privileged to work on a big project along the Chesapeake when I was 30.
Oh,
and
wow.
it was a chance of a lifetime. And there were just 5 of us on the crew working there, doing a historic reconstruction, and colorful people, but all of the same thread. I mean, essentially hippies, but but 3 out of the 5 were boat builders from the eastern shore of Maryland. And one of those 3 was a tall, broad-shouldered woman named June. And June could swing an axe just as good as any of the guys, possibly better. She had been a boat builder on the eastern shore. She was a unique character, and she's just become an indelible memory for everything that we did in those days. I mean, I can still smell and feel the air and the humidity and the bugs and working there in the damp eastern forest. So that's that's one bucket, I guess. Otherwise, why do we write?
Right.
What are stories? What the stories do for us? Maybe they give some structure to our lives. I mean, most of us are bumbling around, doing the best we can day to day. But when we pick up a book, it's organized in such a way that it brings some sense of measure to our lives. We can see how other people got through their struggles, what their joys were, how they reacted to them. And that's the other bucket. I mean, that's part of what the inspiration was. June was fiercely independent and pretty much raised herself since she was 7. So by the time I met her, when she was in her 20s or so, uh, she was pretty independent and strong, and just made a huge impression on me. Uh,
Mm.
in the book, they become a romantic couple. That never happened. But
You knew
uh,
I was going to ask.
no, we were really good friends, and so she is one of the inspirations for writing this, and she takes place in the book 25 years ago.
Mm,
James is in his little armchair in his Lilliputian cottage in Venice,
mm,
and he's telling the story 25 years later. And his life, so he's looking at June, he's thinking about June and that 1 year that they had together. But
mm,
his current life, 25 years later, is anchored uh, and somewhat uh, pulled down by his eccentric neighbor. And in the book, I call him Erskine, but he too is modeled after someone that I, just like June, was fiercely independent, made
mm,
things up as he went along, didn't care, did things without really thinking about the consequences. And he was a really colorful character. So he made a big impression on me too. So in James's retirement, sitting in his little cottage telling this story, he's
mhm,
interrupted frequently by Erskine. And
mm.
that's where the darkly comic side comes in.
Got it. Very cool. Very, very cool. Now, I've got to ask. So we know this is it's not true, right? It is
No,
based in true individuals, true
sure.
selves. How did you go about writing this? Did you just like wake up one morning and say, "Oh my God, I need to write about June"? Did you are I guess I'm poorly asking. Are you more
No,
of a
not at all.
pantser, a plotter?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I'm a pantser, and
okay.
I, June, as I said, June's been an indelible memory, and I just, yeah, one morning just thought, oh, I have a great idea for a love story,
Mm.
and I'm gonna take June and James, and that was the working love. That was the working title for the about 6 years writing this. It's
Oh
June and
wow.
James, June and James, a love story, and
Mhm.
it's not a romantic love story by any means. I mean, yeah, they're romancing, but it's more of an adventure, more of an odyssey, and I wanted to take them through. Uh, well, like in any character, when we're writing,
Mhm.
we want to know what it is they need and what's standing between them and that what they need. So
Mm.
uh, June, when we meet her, and when she's 25, is so strong and independent and
Mhm.
just on her own, doesn't need anything, we think. But then as the story unfolds, we realize, well, we all need something, and
Mhm.
including June. And so we look into that a little bit. And then James gets caught up in with June. Uh, he too is, we've portrayed James, or I've portrayed James as a Viet vet. And so
Mm.
he's a little bit older than June, and he's, as you mentioned, emotionally adrift or removed.
Mhm.
And uh, June makes June finds strength in him. She finds a quietness in him that
Mhm.
she appreciates. Um, she she finds him to be a little bit different than most of the guys that she's ever fallen in with, uh,
Mm.
who were, most of them were bad Leroy Brown, you know, and and uh, and James is just the opposite of that. And
Mm.
so she realizes early on in the story that maybe this is where I should have been all my life with this guy.
Huh. Wow.
So,
Um,
oh, go ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. Nope.
Well, so uh, James, again, being emotionally removed, uh, is just fascinated with meeting this woman who's so strong and seems to be a woman born without filters. You know, like she's just diving in the deep end wherever she goes, and she's
Mm.
going to come out fine. and he's just super impressed with that, and realizes in his fugue state from Vietnam
Mhm.
that he's got a second life coming, and it's through June. She is showing him how to live after
Mhm.
the trauma that he's been through. So
Wow, that's amazing. So what caused you to say, you know what, this is not the title. The title is This
um,
Then Is What Counts. And what does that mean for the story?
yeah, that was a last minute decision with your editor and your marketing people.
Mm.
I suggested it to them, but they said, "Right on, do it." You know, that's- uh, so yeah, Peter Wright
Mm,
really jumped all over that. Uh,
mhm,
well, it was kind of a misnomer of being June and James a love story when it's not really what you would call a love story.
mhm,
Uh, but that this then is what counts is a line from Herrigel's Art and the Zen of Archery.
mm,
And Herrigel was in Japan. He was teaching philosophy in the 1920s, and he
mhm,
was overwhelmed by the Zen archers who would just they were so good at what they did without
mm,
thinking.
mm,
And so that's where this line comes from, and it's critical to the story that this is then is what counts, an action which um, needs no further conscious observation. So
mm.
yeah, so it's and that line shows up twice in the book. Um, so it became a good title. And Peter, having read it and worked with me on it for months, uh,
Mhm.
jumped all over that. He just thought that's what we should do.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And what was your experience in working with Peter, who's one of our phenomenal editors?
He is a phenomenal editor, and uh, maybe like many writers, uh, well, first of all, let me back up. Peter said, "This is your book,
Mhm.
so I'm going to make suggestions. They're going to be smart suggestions, but
They better be, damn it.
but but it is your book, and so let's see how that goes." And truthfully, I didn't include some of the changes that he had suggested, and then I did change a lot of them.
Mhm,
Uh, but it was near the end of that process of the editing process that my wife, who's my most favored critic, uh, said, "Show me Peter's notes, and then show
mhm.
me what you did." And I did it. And she said,
Ooh.
"Jim," yeah, she said, "No, you're not hitting the mark. Here's what he meant. Do this." And so she made me. She, I went back. I readdressed the manuscript, and
Mm,
uh, and yeah, Peter was invaluable. I, being a pantser, I write by the seat of my pants, and
mhm,
I write quickly,
mhm,
and especially in the first third of the book, Peter's most revealing comment to me was that you're speeding through this area. You're not giving the reader an opportunity to get settled and to find
mm,
out where does the reader sit in all of this, and
mm,
where are we right now. Just later in the book, you do a great job at that, but in the beginning, you're just going too fast,
mhm,
and so I had to slow down and back up. And in my experience as a writer, I've come across a couple people like that. That
mhm.
if you really listen to them and uh, and consider what they're trying to help you with, it can be so invaluable. And
Mm.
the book became so much better working with Peter.
And how wonderful to have such an amazing critic as your wife, who was able to sit down. Because sometimes, and I think this is true of all writers, right? And at least in my experience, all editors are actually writers as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, we all sit down and have moments where it's like you hear it, but you don't. So if you have someone who can translate what the person's saying, and then,
Sure.
oh my God,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, that's what he meant. Right.
Now
Yeah.
I
I,
understand.
I, Jane's been invaluable that way, and I when George Saunders came out with Lincoln in the Bardo, after 30 years of writing short stories,
Mhm.
many of us have heard the story about in his early years, he had tried writing a novel and he left for the weekend. And when he came home, his wife was sitting in the chair reading the manuscript and just
Mhm.
shaking her head and looking dour. No, George, no. And and he said he never tried a novel after that for the next 30 years until
Oh
he
my goodness.
finally got his guts together and got his act together and wrote Lincoln in the Bardo.
Wow.
But it is great to have that kind of relationship with Jane, and she's been a great critic. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And she's also, I think I may have mentioned to you early on that
Mhm.
uh, I was concerned about appropriating the life of a black woman. June is a black
Mm.
woman,
Mhm.
and Jane had been telling me that for 6 years. Says, "How can you do that?" And it's a woman. It's not a black woman. I mean, in my early years, I taught in inner city school in Philadelphia,
Mhm.
and I lived right across from the school.
Mm.
So the kids would beat me home, and to my third floor apartment. I come home and there's kids in the apartment,
Oh, wow.
and it was mostly minority school. It was black and Puerto Rican,
Mhm.
and but they found a home there in our apartment, and counted the change in the jar and all. And it was an expanding experience for me to be among people who, first of all, lived in the inner city, which I never
Mhm.
had. I grew up like Tom Sawyer, and
Mhm.
along a
Oh,
creek,
wow.
in Pennsylvania. But
Mhm.
uh, but seeing that, going back to what one of the first things we talked about today was that everyone needs something, and
Mhm.
everyone has something standing in the way of that. And it's
Mhm.
what Kurt Vonnegut said, like every character needs something, even if it's only a glass of water.
Mhm.
Just we gotta, and that's what those kids were like. And
Mm.
that's and and that when I was writing the character of June, that's what she
Mhm.
was like too. She
Mm.
she really did need something, even though she put up a good front. Uh,
Got it.
yeah, yeah.
Well, we've actually got a couple of questions and comments in the chat. So actually, Rod is asking, do you still know June today? And does she like the character that you wrote?
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen June in, I don't know, 30, 40 years, 40 years probably.
Mm.
She's still around. I'm sure she's still as independent and kind of the earth mother that she was then.
Mhm.
Um, I I believe she's living in Maine and living a subsistence life, raising her
Mm.
own food and fishing, and yeah.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
yeah, I don't. Some of the things that happen between June and James, especially in the early part of the book, really did happen. And
Mhm.
I, as a writer, you amplify it or you tune it down or whatever, but
Right.
it's based on things that really happened, and those things I think June would enjoy. Uh,
Mm.
June and James really did go to a bluegrass concert together, and where
Mm.
June came unhinged, and it was amazing. And I write about that in the book. That I mean, I was. She's just bigger than life. So,
Yeah.
but
That's
no,
awesome.
I haven't seen her in 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Mitch Allen says, well, I suggested June and Jim and Jack and Joe and Julie and Jennifer, but Brennan wouldn't go for it. My goodness, aren't we
Mitch,
ready?
Mitch is one of my antagonists. He's a good friend, a former publisher, retired publisher, uh, smart guy, great sense of humor, and yeah, he's been on me. He read an early version, an early draft of this book,
Mhm.
and made some great comments, and I was, really, I'm indebted to him for that.
Well, thank you, Mitch. Even in your bratty commentary.
He is a brat.
You are, absolutely, totally. Rod says, some of us authors are so blessed to have great supportive wives. You, sir, Mr. King, and myself. Where would we be without our better halves? And actually, that's a nice lead into my additional question. Where do you feel Mitch is like, I'm a proud brat.
Yeah, there's no humility there.
clearly no humility. But what are your core influences? And that could be either in writing, it could be in storytelling, or it could just be in general. Where do you find that passion?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, Lisa. It started early on. In second grade, Richard Rupert and I wrote a play
Oh
and
wow. Okay.
and, and performed it for the class.
Oh.
And it must have been awful, but what we did, we performed this play,
Mm,
and and my through arts, I went through art school, and in art school, I was an illustrator and uh, had to pay attention to, or I was paying attention to details and to how people move and how they interact and the composition of how they fill a room, and all of that I think has an influence. Also, I was a musician, and I think that uh, has an influence on my voice, on the sense of timing,
mm,
meter, and so forth. Um, there was a turning around when I was, I think, in my 20s, mid 20s,
mhm.
um, when I was really cynical about bestsellers. I said, if
Mm.
everybody loves it, there's got to be something wrong with it. and uh, and then I picked up Garp. I just
Mm,
happened to find a dog-eared copy of it and read it and went, wow, now
mm,
that's storytelling, you know.
mm,
And so that's a big influence, was John Irving and the way he tells a story.
mm,
Uh, as far as for language, there's a couple major influences. One is Anita Shreve and her sparse sentences and her sparse prose. I mean, she
mm,
gets to things very quickly and very simply, and
mm,
I've enjoyed the way she puts sentences together. And
mm.
I just recently reread Capote's first published novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms,
Oh wow. Okay.
and he was writing that when he was 19, and
Good Lord.
the language, yeah, and the depth and the control of the language is incredible. It's poetic.
Mm,
Uh, so those are big influences. As far as craft, uh, Robert McKee plays
mhm.
a huge role. I mean, I think his seminars and workshops have been sold out for 40 years.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
but uh, I've gotten a lot out of reading his work. And Nancy Kress is another writer who has written on the craft of writing,
Mhm.
and others, Charles Baxter, Anne Lamott.
Oh, love Charles.
Yeah, I wrote to him after, what I forget the title of it. It was something banquet,
Mm.
and I just wrote to him and told him he destroyed me in chapter 11. That near the end of the book, I was
That
a
was it.
blubbering mess, you know?
Yep.
And he wrote back. He thanked me for that.
He is a lovely man. I could totally see him
Yeah,
writing back. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, Tyler Burton says, you said it was more of an adventure than a love story. Can you tell us about the adventure without giving away the story?
Uh, well, thanks for that, Tyler. I Yeah, I can, as much as the synopsis that you read early on, Lisa.
Mhm.
That Yeah, June's past presents itself all
Mm,
of a sudden, and by then June and James are are a couple,
mhm,
and June tells James, either run hard, fight hard, or I'm screwed. And they did run. And that's where the adventure starts. And it's this odyssey that they're on, this tragic odyssey that takes them cross country. Um, and yeah, I can't tell you a lot more, but they meet an array of, of people that are kind of one-offs, one-off people. Uh, they meet a guy in Norfolk, Nebraska. That's his name's Gordon Oldshield, and he works out of a tar paper shack down by the river, and he sells ears and snouts and hot sauce, and he's typically naked, but for his white apron, and he's about 8 feet tall. So
Hey, it works.
There are characters like that throughout. That, and I, you know, without giving it any more away, they meet quite an array of people that influence them, and they influence those people, and I think an action word there is that it's a tragic odyssey. James is telling this story 25 years later, and he's only lived with June for a year. That was 25 years ago. So what happened?
Yeah. Well, there you go. Sally Gunther says, please make an audible. Or Jared can read it to me. Well, Sally, I got to tell you, we are absolutely currently working on the audiobook. So we are hoping, I just because you mentioned it, I am looking for this at this now. We are hoping for it to be out in I want to say in the next month or so. So, so yeah, we are that is definitely in progress.
Great.
And with that, what I just want to ask, is there anything that you would love to leave our viewers with?
Yeah, well, if you're watching this, you're probably a reader, and I hope you'll keep reading. If you choose to read, this then is what counts. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the process of putting it together. Being a pantser, writing by the seat of my pants, I told my wife, Jane, one day, I said, I think they're getting married today. And exactly the opposite happened, you know, because you sit down and you know, once you start writing, these characters they take control. They take on a life of their own voices, and and a lot of the stuff that when I go back and look at the manuscript now, I don't really remember writing it. I think that was writing itself, you know.
Yeah.
But to leave you, as a reader, keep reading, and if you're not in a book group, try to get into one. The book group that I'm in has really expanded my reading practice. I tend to, we probably all tend to read things that are going to support our own writing. So I read in the style. I read Ann Tyler, and I read Toni Morrison, and Pat Conroy. But in this book group, now we have 8 or 10 people that are all contributing and picking the book for the month. And as Mitch says, the book is the book. You know, whoever picks it, that's what we're going to read.
There you go.
Yeah. And so if you can get into a book group, I would recommend that.
Excellent.
And another thing, I want to thank Lisa and Running Wild Press for being exploratory and being willing to look beyond the sad songs and waltzes that aren't selling this year. You know, I mean, to just look for good stories. And it's been a pleasure working with you. Well,
thank you. And thank you for writing This Then Is What Counts. cannot wait for it to get into everyone's hands. Don't forget, guys, January 22nd, please, please, please go out. Pre-order this baby. You definitely want to check it out. And again, it's absolutely a complete and utter pleasure. So with that, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a phenomenal rest of your weekend.